Well, howdy there, folks. James, politicalfriar.com, coming at you again. I got the law hat on and even the law shirt on, so we're having a very law topic today. It's the 14th Amendment, Section 3 again. Now, we did a video on this not too long ago, lining out what the legal arguments and issues that were in front of a number of courts and how Donald Trump might or might not be qualified to run for president as an insurrectionist. Well, we got our first really fully fleshed out legal decision in this, and it was sufficiently detailed that I wanted to go through it and make sure that we understood what the decision says, what it doesn't say, and what it means for Donald Trump going forward. So, Colorado court held a trial on whether the 14th Amendment Section 3 disqualified Trump. And the importance of this is procedural. It allowed the judge to act as fact finder, to determine some legal facts the same way a jury does. And once those legal facts are determined, they have weight when they're questioned by appealing on appeal. And so an appellate court can't overturn a finding of fact by a district court unless that finding of fact is irrational, is so unreasonable that no juror or judge could possibly believe it to be true. And so, in creating this record of found facts, the judge in Colorado has put Trump into a little bit of bind based on the facts that the judge found. And that, despite Donald Trump winning, quote, winning in Colorado, is troubling news for the legal prospects of Donald Trump and the 14th Amendment. Now, this is a legal analysis. If you want my political analysis, you want to go to the end of the last video I did on the 14th Amendment, and I'll link that below. Basically, I'm going to repeat, I'd really prefer the voters make this decision about Donald Trump rather than the courts. But this is about as compelling a legal question as you can get. And so I felt the need to read the 102-page order and understand how the Colorado judge addressed this issue. And now I'm going to share a little bit of that with you. So here's the thing. The Colorado judge knew that this wasn't going to be the last word on the issue, even says so in a footnote on page 25, says the court does this because it is cognizant that to the extent the Colorado Supreme Court decides to review this matter, it may disagree with any number of the legal conclusions contained in this order. The court has endeavored to give the Colorado Supreme Court all the information it needs to resolve the matter fully and finally without the delay of returning to the court. And this is where the finding of facts becomes really important. Because if this court hadn't found all of the legal facts, then the remedy, if the appeals court disagreed with this trial court, would be to remand for those finding of facts to be done. Well, now that's over. You don't need to remand to find facts. The facts have already been found, and so this Colorado Supreme Court can rely on those found facts and actually just come up with a legal conclusion. So a lot of what we are getting here is teeing this case up for the Colorado Supreme Court to decide. So to do that, the the judge rejected every legal argument that the Trump side made except for one, and specifically wrote on all of them. And so we've got the argument that the Secretary of State can't alter the ballot for the primary. That is something the judge rejected. It says, of course they can. If you have a 30-year-old running for president, the Secretary of State will not put them on the ballot. There's no need for a court finding for something that's that clear and evident. Now, the less clear and less evident qualifications have to go through the court, but that's what the court did here. The court says the Secretary of State was correct to refer this issue to the courts to decide whether Donald Trump is eligible for Colorado's ballot. And she, again, teed up the Supreme Court. There's no question now that the Supreme Court of Colorado is the body that ought to resolve this, not the Secretary of State. Although the Secretary of State is empowered in clear cases to do it, the courts are the ones that are supposed to do it. So that clears up that argument, though. That is to say, it's not like the Secretary of State can't strike Trump from the ballot. It just has to do so at the direction of the court. This is unlike the Minnesota case. The Minnesota Supreme Court actually found that their Secretary of State could not strike Trump from the primary ballot because the primaries were controlled by the parties. And the Minnesota Supreme Court said, yes, the court and the Secretary of State could strike Donald Trump in a general election, thus punting it. So this is different. This is the Colorado uh, trial court judge saying the Colorado Supreme Court can intervene at the primary, not just the general. So this is a slight distinction from Minnesota in their legal analysis. The next most important legal conclusion that this judge came to is that Section 3 does not require enabling legislation. Remember, this is the argument from Samuel P. Chase that said that the Section 3 isn't self-enacting. You can't apply it until Congress has defined the terms and defined the way that it will actually be applied. And Congress did so in 1870 for the Section 3 purposes and repealed that. And so, in that there is no enabling legislation, maybe Section 3 can't be used. Well, the trial court rejected that argument, said that it got used to exclude people before the 1870 enabling legislation, and it has been used since that legislation was repealed. And therefore, the plain reading of the language, along with precedent, says that the enabling legislation merely aided in the conduct of those hearings, not actually was not actually required to have those. So this is a rejection of the Chase argument that was what the only other Supreme Court level precedent that we have on the issue. The next thing that the judge did is she tasked herself with defining some words in Section 3. She tasked herself with defining insurrection, and she used various legal sources and historical sources, some of them that I discussed in the last video on this case, talking about the Insurrection Act, making a distinction that the Insurrection Act definition is criminal in nature, whereas 14th Amendment Section 3 is civil in nature. And so those, you can't just copy paste the definition over, because it's not meant to punish a criminal insurrection. It's meant to provide a remedy of disqualification for civil insurrection, for lack of a better word. And this was a distinction that was made at the time. She cites Daniel Webster's 1842 dictionary. She cites the laws that were written by the same people who wrote the Section 3. And she comes to the conclusion that insurrection, as originally intended by the framers of Section 3, note that she's bowing to originalism here. Insurrection is 1, the public use of force or threat of force. 2, by a group of people. 3, to hinder or prevent the execution of the Constitution of the United States. She further concluded that that's exactly what happened on January 6th. That the people who attacked the Capitol were publicly using force, they were in a group, and their purpose was to hinder the counting of electoral votes, a constitutional duty. I think it's pretty easy. If you adopt that definition, then yes, January 6th was an insurrection. The next question is, as we discussed previously, did Donald Trump engage or give aid and comfort to the insurrection? And the judge, after a very long discussion of the word engage, decided that yes, Donald Trump did engage or give aid and comfort, or both. Actually, she says both, to the insurrection. Now, the definition of engage that Trump's attorneys offered was the active taking up of arms against the United States. But this is an absurd definition. That can't be right, because the very politicians that the 14th Amendment Section 3 was designed to exclude from holding office, they didn't fight on the front lines. They didn't take up arms. Their only participation in the insurrection was by their words and by their encouragement, by their orders sometimes to those people who did take up arms, by their words telling people who heard their words as a call to violence. That's the basic idea that the judge purports out there, is that Donald Trump understood, in context of 4 or 5 years of political speech to this group of people, that it is more likely than not to incite violence which was directed at impeding a constitutional process. Therefore, you have engage. Or, on the alternative, remember Section 3 gives another way to get in trouble, and that's give aid and comfort to. And the judge at this juncture focuses on the time between 2:17 and 4:17 on January 6th, where Donald Trump sent out a tweet at 2:17 that was broadly understood by the people who were currently attacking the Capitol as encouragement. The tweet said, "We've got to fight for our rights." It was standard Trump stuff, but the timing was particularly important because the Donald Trump was aware at that time that he sent that tweet that the attack was ongoing, and the tweet didn't say, "Don't attack, don't fight for your rights." The tweet was seen and certainly understood by the people who read it in real time as encouragement. She found unpersuasive his follow up tweets that say, "Stay peaceful," because they didn't call off the attack. They didn't call on his supporters to withdraw from the Capitol. It wasn't until 4:17 that Donald Trump actually called off the attack on the Capitol. And the way we know that his folks were listening to him and taking at least what they perceived to be orders from him was that it worked. As soon as Trump said, "Go home," they did. Until he said, "Go home," they didn't. And in that, the judge found that Donald Trump gave aid and comfort to the rioters, or insurrectionists, I suppose, because she did find that as a matter of fact, because he could have stopped it at any time. And she found that he knew that. She found, as a matter of fact, that he was aware of his power over his supporters, and he chose not to exercise it, therefore giving comfort to their actions, an endorsement by implication. So she decides that, yeah, he engaged in the insurrection. The next question that she decided was, well, was this speech protected? Right? Because everything that he did to engage in the insurrection was speech. He didn't march on the Capitol, despite him saying maybe he wanted to. He didn't beat up cops. He just used words. Well, this brings us to the famous Brandenburg test, the First Amendment case that came out of a Ku Klux Klan member who incited violence against nebulous people, not specific people. So the Supreme Court tells us that to have your words not be protected by the First Amendment in a context of inciting violence, it has to incite violence immediate. It's a clear and present danger type of test. And so if you have nebulous words that say we got to fight like hell, out of context of a immediate threat of violence, then that's First Amendment protected speech. You can say that. But if in the context it is reasonable to believe that your speech will incite imminent violence, it's not protected. And the judge talked about all of the ways that Donald Trump was aware that his speech could incite imminent violence. In particular, he knew that his attendees to the ellipse speech were armed and ready for a fight. The Secret Service, through one of the checkpoints, confiscated 269 knives, 242 pepper spray bottles, 18 brass knuckles, 18 tasers, and etc. There were 25,000 people who didn't go through the Secret Service's checkpoints, and Trump had been informed by the Secret Service that they were likely armed. He was well aware that these people were spoiling for a fight when he directed them to go fight at the Capitol. In this context, the judge found that his direction to fight like hell was a direction to violence. And interviewing the participants of the January 6th insurrection, that's exactly what they heard. And that's exactly what they did. And they did it all the way up until Donald Trump gave the order to stop fighting. It's pretty simple to understand. And that's what the judge found happened as a matter of legal fact, because this is, again, important. The Colorado Supreme Court is not allowed to second guess the judge's findings of fact. Or at least they have to give great deference to those findings of fact. And so the judge found that Donald Trump had the requisite mental state. He knew or intended He knew that it would, or he intended for there to be violence at the Capitol. He knew that that would disrupt the constitutionally protected or constitutionally mandated counting of the votes. And therefore, he had the specific intent to incite violence, to commit an insurrection. Therefore, he's facially disqualified, right? But wait, Trump won. How did Trump win, though? And the reason is awesome. Statutory construction, one of my favorites. See, Section 3 specifically lists senators as if they took an oath and then committed or gave aid and comfort to insurrection, senators can't be elected to federal office. You can't be a representative. You can't be a electoral vote caster. You can't be any other office of the United States, and that's a catch-all. And so you say, James, of course, the president is any other office of the United States, except for there's this rule called the rule of implied exception. If you have like words, senator, representative, those are officers, specific officers of the United States, and then you have something else that is like a senator or a representative, say vice president and president, if those are excluded from the explicit list, you can't bring them in through the back door through the catch-all. So senator comes first, then down a rank, representative, then down a rank, elector, and then everything else. The everything else implicitly applies to things below the rank of elector, and it implicitly excludes president and vice president. Now that's ridiculous. Of course, we all know that the president is an office, right? You've heard of the office of the president of the United States, and therefore the occupant of the office is an officer. Good argument. But it's not super clear. And this is where the judge gets off. The judge says, no, I'm not going to kick somebody off of the ballot for president of the United States without this being more clear in its ban. Because there is legislative history. There's a recorded conversation between two senators, one senator asking the drafter, the actual guy who wrote the 14th Amendment, Section 3, hey, does this include the president? And the guy who wrote it said, yes, it does. But you've also got a more legislative history where a previous version of the draft included president, vice president, senator, representative, and that didn't make the final cut. How did that happen? Why would those words be excluded? And the only answer that you can reasonably come to is that they meant to. They meant to exclude them. This is one of the reasons why legislative history isn't very helpful for interpreting statutes. It's because you can usually get enough volume in the legislative history that you'll get the yes, absolutely, this is the interpretation, and no, absolutely, that's not the interpretation in the same legislative history. And so the general rule is you go with just words that end up getting all the way to the end and were affirmed. And those words don't include president as an office that can be excluded if you incite an insurrection. So we have a full-up legal finding of fact that is presumed to be correct on appeal, that Donald Trump incited an insurrection on January 6th. And then we have a question of law as to whether there's any remedy for that. And this judge says, no. But the Supreme Court's going to get their say. And then the big Supreme Court's going to get their say too. Well, stay tuned. And I really appreciate you taking the time. Tell me how wrong I am in the comments down below, please. Hit like, subscribe. Actually, subscribe is the one thing that would do me the best. Even if you didn't watch another video, hit that subscribe button. Watching them is important too. But at the moment, that's the metric that's the most important. And leave me a comment, of course. I really appreciate it. Thanks.